I see One Nation's been the only consistent political party for the last 20 years.
They're not talking about you. All right, well, let me tell you, One Nation is talking about you.
It's like the media's run away from One Nation. They're too scared to ask us any questions, mainly because we're straight talkers and we've got the answers.
This is like a call to arms. You guys need to start making the real decisions and who you're going to vote for.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the ExCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp, and as always, I'm joined by Rebecca Thompson and Adam Zara. How are you guys going tonight?
Good, thank you.
How you going?
And we're very excited because this episode we have Dr. Peter Ridd on. Now, most of you may already know Dr. Ridd already with all his work over the years. But just for those that don't know, he's a senior research fellow at the Institute of Public Affairs, and but he was also the former professor and head of physics at James Cook University. How are you going tonight, Peter?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on.
No problem at all. Now, that was a little bit of a brief introduction from me, but can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
So I'm a physicist by trade, but I started working on the Great Barrier Reef in 1984, looking at ocean currents, tides, the movement of sediment onto coral reefs, instrumentation development. And essentially we worked on the reef since then. And over a period of time, I became more and more convinced that the reef wasn't being damaged by all sorts of things, including the impact of farming on the reef. And eventually that disagreement with some of my colleagues sort of spilled over, and I was saying that there was a serious quality assurance problems in the scientific institution, which I'm still completely convinced of, and that ended up to me being fired from James Cook University in 2018.
That kind of led to a lot of your popularity, didn't it? It was like was that your first public exposure?
Certainly on anything like that scale, yes. I mean, I'd done a little bit of stuff for local papers, but nothing like that. We had huge support, including by Pauline Hanson, actually. So Pauline Hanson was instrumental in getting the new academic freedom legislation up in March last year. She really pushed that through. So I was very grateful for that. If I had been working under the new legislation when I ran into trouble, I don't think the university would have had much of a leg to stand on. It would have been quite interesting. So, yeah, I hadn't really done a huge amount before then.
Dr. Ridd, you raised the point that you had a disagreement with your fellow peers and then you ended up being terminated from James Cook for that. Isn't that the nature of science in the first place between scientists?
Well, exactly. I mean, there was a couple of instances. The first one was that there was these famous pictures of some coral around Stone Island near Bowen, and there was these two pictures, one from 1893 showing a very low tide and the coral coming out of the water, and beautiful coral, and then supposedly a similar, the same area today or more recently, showing absolutely no coral. And I was convinced this couldn't have been right because our own work had shown that the effect of farming wasn't killing these reefs the way these scientists were claiming. And so I sent a couple of my guys down to actually look at those coral reefs, and they were able to take pictures of absolutely beautiful coral on those reefs. And I just asked the simple question: how on earth had these scientists made such a terrible error? Where was their quality assurance that they were publishing misleading stuff? And that got me into trouble. So even though we demonstrated that the other group were completely wrong, they'd said, here is a reef with no coral on it, and we were able to say, well, there's a huge amount of coral. I was the one who ended up in trouble and being done for misconduct, academic misconduct, because I didn't say it in a nice way. But it's very difficult to say to another group, your quality assurance has got a big problem. I was as polite as you could be. I didn't claim that they were deliberately lying or anything. I just said that they'd published misleading stuff and they had a problem with their quality assurance. Well, of course they're going to get upset. They don't like you saying that. I wouldn't like somebody saying that to me, but that is just the nature of a scientific argument, and the university should have viewed it in that light.
Now, you've been in the headlines in the last few weeks because of this this graph that I'll just bring up on the screen now, which is showing that record high coral in the Great Barrier Reef. I know you've been very excited about that. Do you want to just talk about what that means?
Well, look, this is just the most wonderful graph, because what this proves is, firstly, that, well, this is the amount of coral on the Great Barrier Reef, okay? And it goes back to 1985, when the Australian Institute of Marine Science, where I used to work, first started measuring the coral cover on a large number of reefs, right up to this year. And you can see that this year, 2022, we've got more coral on the Great Barrier Reef than we've ever had since records begun, and by quite a lot more, actually. And, this is despite supposedly 4 massive bleaching events in the last 6 years, 2016, 2017, 2020, and 2022. Now, they claim that we lost a lot of coral in those 4 events. And remember, coral takes, even the fast-growing coral takes 5 years to 10 years to regrow. And we've got record high coral cover this year. So how can we have lost a lot of coral in those events if now we've got record high coral cover? So this is a wonderful graph because, one, it shows that the reef is great. And secondly, it's demonstrating unequivocally that all these science institutions are utterly untrustworthy in terms of what they're saying. I guess that's not a good thing. I guess that's a bad thing. But in terms of our cause, where we've known this for quite a long time, this is unequivocal proof that these institutions are, to a large extent, untrustworthy. I should say that there's a caveat there. This group at the Australian Institute of Marine Science are not untrustworthy, because they've actually published this stuff, and they've agreed that we are at record high coral cover, at least in 2 of the 3 major regions. So there are still good scientists out there which will still tell the truth, even though it may not show exactly what they would think it would show.
Can you explain what bleaching is?
Right, so bleaching is, so I should go back to what coral is. So coral is it's an animal. It can be in plate form or in these great big blocks, and it's made up of a large number, often thousands or millions, of very small little polyps. And they have a calcium carbonate skeleton, which is a little bit like concrete. And inside the actual animal, there will often be an algae called zooxanthellae. And the algae and the animal coral polyp live together in a symbiotic relationship. The animal gets a bit of energy from the plant, and the plant gets a nice cosy existence. And for some reason, either when the water gets too hot, or even when it gets too cold, or if it gets too fresh, or if there's some other stress on the coral will throw that algae out. And that happens during bleaching. And it bleaches when the algae gets chucked out. The coral goes white because the colour from the coral actually comes from the algae that's inside it. So bleaching is when it expels the algae, but the coral usually does not die when it bleaches. Usually it will survive.
So that means it's still surviving even though it's gone white. How long does it actually ever get its color back, or does it actually start to grow bigger again after bleaching?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it does die. There's no doubt about it. Usually it won't, but sometimes it's certainly possible. And it can take a few months to get its colour back, and then it starts growing as usual. Now, it's certainly been knocked around. It doesn't like being bleached, or it doesn't like bleaching. It means it's losing energy when that happens, so it probably grows just a little bit slower when it's under those bleaching conditions. But, it's like any ecosystem. It doesn't, the grass in my yard in Townsville, this time of the year, it will go brown at every year, and it will come back when the wet season starts. Every organism goes through periods of stress. One of the things that happens with coral is that occasionally things go wrong. It bleaches. It doesn't like it. It usually doesn't die. But, it's just one of those things.
And just on that, once it does bleach, and then if it does happen to die, does new coral eventually form over the bleached coral?
Yeah, definitely. So it will die. It will often break up when it's after it's been killed, and then new coral will start to grow. So, for example, in 2016 there was a loss of coral in some areas. So in the Cooktown Lizard Island area, there was a significant loss of coral from bleaching, but it had pretty well totally grown back within 5 to 6 years. Well, definitely within 5 to 6 years. So it doesn't take that long, and they're the fastest growing corals. Now, the great big block corals, we call them the massives, the brain corals maybe, they are not very susceptible to bleaching. They usually do not bleach. So they will usually go straight through a bleaching event. They're in for the long run. These staghorn and plate coral, they're a little bit like weeds. They grow very quickly, but they're very susceptible to everything from bleaching to crown of thorns starfish, and especially the big killer of coral, which is cyclones. So the waves from are chucked up by the cyclonic winds, they just totally smash coral, and you can lose almost all your coral basically overnight in a cyclone.
So we're at record level coral of coral now. Is there a reason for that? The reason is that we haven't had any really major cyclones, except for Cyclone Debbie, which was big, but it wasn't an enormous cyclone. Nothing major since about 2010 or 11. And those are the big killers. We've also seen the crown of thorns starfish plagues are not as bad as they have been in the past. They're also totally natural. We know that these have been going on for thousands of years, and they haven't been too bad, and we've just had everything go well, and the reef is now at record high coral. And now, they're native to Australia as well. It's not like an introduced species, is it?
Totally. It's not like cats or foxes or cane toads. These are native animals, and the federal government is spending, I think, something like $20 million every year going out killing crown of thorns starfish. And you think, why are you doing that? You wouldn't go off shooting koalas or echidnas or something like that. You're doing the same thing with these things, and they're a natural thing. We know they're natural because geologists at my university, JCU, used to drill holes in the reef, and if the further down you drill, the more back in time you go, because the reef slowly grows up. And they've been able to find the spikes of the crown of thorns starfish going back thousands of years in very, very high numbers. So there's no reason to expect that crown of thorns are any worse now than they were 1,000 years ago. It's just that before the 1960s, there was no science on the Great Barrier Reef, no scientists. There was almost nobody there. So when they went out there finally and saw these big plagues of starfish, they started to think, well, are these caused by mankind or are they natural? And people sort of jumped to the conclusion that they were somehow caused by us, and therefore they're our enemy and we've got to kill them. Now, they're in such large numbers that there's no way you can have any significant effect on them, but we should just view them as part of the ecosystem and don't mess with them, except for on tourist pontoons where you don't want them eating all the coral that the tourists are going to see. But the rest of the place, we should actually let them eat the coral because it's just part of nature.
And how do they kill them?
Yeah, I was going to jump in as well. So,
you can't shoot them or anything, can they?
They inject them. I think they use vinegar now. You might need to correct me. I may not have that exactly right, but they just inject, I think, vinegar into them and it kills them. It's a very slow process. And remember, the reef is big. I mean, people don't realise how big the reef is. It's as big as Victoria. It's as big as Germany. If you think that you're going to have a few boats floating around on this system with divers, who have to go very slowly, and you're going to kill anything but a minute, tiny fraction of the number of crown of thorns starfish. It's just a crazy thing that we're doing, but we've been doing it now for, a couple of decades, and there's a whole lot of people whose livelihoods depend on it. I'm sure they're good people, but, there's much, if you worried about feral animals, genuinely feral animals, There are so many nasty feral animals that are out here west of where I am that need to be controlled, or weeds. And we shouldn't waste our time killing native Australian animals, which is what they're doing.
Yeah, and sorry, go for it, Rebecca.
Yeah, you mentioned before that there's a new reef regulations being introduced for farmers. Could you talk a little bit more about that for us, please?
Yeah, so a lot of people know that supposedly climate change is killing the reef, and clearly it isn't, because we've got record high coral cover. But farmers have been blamed for damaging the reef for the best part of 30 years. And regulations on them have slowly got more and more strict until 2 years ago. The Queensland government introduced some very draconian regulations restricting pesticides, fertiliser, and also blaming them for sediment coming out and smothering the reef. Now, I've worked on the sediment for 25 years. We invented the instrumentation for measuring the sediment out on reefs. We had more measurements of that than all the other groups put together. And we were able to demonstrate that there's no way that the sediment coming off farms is having any effect whatsoever on the Great Barrier Reef. Of course, this is ignored because it's not the news that they want to hear. Of course, we want to reduce soil erosion. Every farmer wants to do that, but don't blame them for killing the Great Barrier Reef when they're not. Another example was there were supposedly the pesticides are damaging the Great Barrier Reef, the pesticides from farms. But when you look at the data of the pesticide concentrations in the water out on the Great Barrier Reef, which remember is a long way from the coast, it's 50 to 100 kilometres from the coast for large parts of it. When you measure the concentrations of pesticides, they're in such small concentrations that even the most ultra sensitive scientific equipment cannot even detect them, right? So it's effectively not there, but they blame the farmers. And this is just a shocking thing to do. One, because it damages the economics of farming. But two, it also, can you imagine what it's like to be a farmer and to be accused of killing the Great Barrier Reef? We're not just, killing a few trees or damaging, some small... The Great Barrier Reef, you are helping to kill the Great Barrier Reef. They really take that, they really take that to their heart and don't like that, which you can imagine. But there are, really serious consequences for North Queensland in the sense that every single one of our industries has been threatened by regulations on the Great Barrier Reef. Beef, sugar, bananas, dairy, the tourist industry. If you keep on telling all the tourists that the reef has lost half its coral or 93% of its coral, like we keep on doing every year, do you think the tourists are going to keep on coming? And then there's mining, so that's obviously under threat with the climate change thing. So yeah, it is actually serious for North Queensland.
Well, the problem is that Dr. Reid is actually really making an alignment, whereas, because there's no controls or the quality control of the results that you're getting through, like science, across the board, it's a problem.
Yeah, essentially this is a quality assurance problem, that the scientific institutions are doing science which isn't quality assured. They're getting it wrong. There's plenty of reasons why that's happening, and there's plenty of ways which that can be fixed up. But essentially, it's a quality assurance problem. And the problem for people like me is that, you've got, the proverbial man in the street, right? And they believe that the reef has been damaged because they've been told this again and again and again. And I come along, or we come along and say, well, we're at record high coral cover. The reef is fine. And the problem is that the corollary of that for, somebody listening is that, well, hang on, if the reef is really fine, that means that everything those science institutions have been telling me is a lie. And I trust them. I think that, that they're a trustworthy organisation like the ABC, the Australia Post, the Army.
David Attenborough.
David Attenborough, that's right. Oh. So when you say that the reef must be fine, you're also then effectively saying those institutions are corrupted. And people don't want to believe that. And I can understand why they don't want to believe that. because it's just too horrible that these institutions, which we've been told to respect and trust, are actually completely untrustworthy. And that graph you showed demonstrates without any shadow of a doubt that they've been untrustworthy, at least in so far as what they've been saying in terms of the amount of coral that's been lost.
And with the coral, see, now I'm an 80s kid, so I've watched all the National Geographics and David Attenborough's, okay? So that's why I mentioned it.
Yeah.
But so there's always at the end of the story, if we don't do something now, it's never going to be there, but it's still there. With the we're led to believe that the coral is the Great Barrier Reef is a super sensitive organism. That if you know send a boat through there with the fumes from the exhaust going to the water, that the coral's going to die. I can see what you're saying about the correlation between this institution saying that that we can find now that the coral's fine. And then what happens is you can now draw into doubt of all the other things that they've been saying is not going well either.
Well, exactly. That if they've got this wrong, they must be getting a whole lot of other things wrong. I mean, there's nothing more fundamental than, we're at record high coral cover, so how could we have lost so much coral? But yes, they do say that it's effectively, they actually use the expression, it's the canary in the gold mine, this sort of coal mine, this very delicate organism. And yes, an individual coral is delicate, but the idea that a 1 degree increase in temperature, which is all we've seen in the last century, and which is well within the bounds of natural variability, but the idea that 1 degree temperature rise and you can lose, 90% of your coral, why would the corals be so delicate when the temperature difference between winter and summer is 10 degrees? And most of the corals that live on the Great Barrier Reef also live in Thailand and Papua New Guinea, where it's a couple of degrees hotter already. So, this hypersensitivity, hyper-delicateness of the reefs isn't actually borne out by facts. You just got to look at the way the Great Barrier Reef formed 20,000 years ago, under extreme conditions of rapid temperature changes, rapid sea level rise, huge sediment loads because the coastline, as the sea level rose, the coastline was eroding at about 50 metres per year. Can you imagine, Bondi Beach eroding by 50 metres every year? That's what happened for 1,000 years on this coast along here. So
Campbelltown would be beachfront property. Sorry, Campbelltown would be beachfront property at that rate.
Yeah, that's right. And this was happening when the Great Barrier Reef was forming, right? Wow. So because the reef comes and goes. Each reef, there's 3,000 reefs on the Great Barrier Reef, and each one is basically a great big pile of dead coral, like a big flat tabletop hill, a couple of kilometres long and a kilometre or two across. And when the sea level falls, which it does every time that the world goes into a cool period, and that's most of the time, sea level falls, the reef is exposed, trees start growing on it, and then it starts to warm up, the sea level rises, and it reforms. So it goes through these massive upheavals. 1 degree temperature change, nothing. It just breezes through that. And by the way, it's well known that if you increase the temperature of the water, corals just grow faster. The corals at the southern Great Barrier Reef grow a lot slower than the corals at the northern Great Barrier Reef, and the corals in Papua New Guinea and Thailand grow faster than the corals in the northern Great Barrier Reef because it's warmer. It's a no-brainer. You have corals in Sydney Harbour, but I'm sorry, they're pathetic corals because the water is too cold and they don't grow very fast, so you don't have proper reefs. The hotter the water...
That's fighting words. We've got pathetic coral.
It's totally that. New South Wales is corals. Just pathetic compared to Queensland coral.
That's why we don't have a tourism industry for that.
That's right. But can I make a comparison between New South Wales and Queensland? Our biggest tourist attraction is the Great Barrier Reef.
Mm.
You could say it's Australia's biggest tourist attraction.
Yeah.
Every week you will hear some government department talking about how the reef is doomed and we need to spend more money on it, or Google or Coles putting money forward to save the Great Barrier Reef, or the science institutions saying we've lost half the coral. telling the world that our best tourist attraction is basically really broken. Can you imagine if we said to the whole world, Sydney Harbour Bridge, complete wreck, it's all rusty, it's going to fall down pretty soon, no point in even going to see it, right? That's essentially what we're doing to the Great Barrier Reef, because the Sydney Harbour Bridge is not rusty and it's not falling down and it's still wonderful, all right? So is the Great Barrier Reef, and yet we run it down all the time, and it's just a crazy thing we're doing.
I've snorkeled at the Great Barrier Reef. I was lucky enough to go up there one time and do it. And I walked out of there, same thing. I mean, I wasn't so switched on, 15 years ago about everything. But as I said, I thought I better see it before it goes. And and I remember they used to say they used to want to stop the boats and the tours to go through there because the propellers damage everything and you're affecting the sea life and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't see it not being healthy even 15 years ago when I went and saw it. So your point, that was leading into the question of the graph that you showed where it shows maximum amount of coral cover 2022 since 1985. How do you get those numbers? How is it? Do you measure like a square kilometre or 2 square kilometres and then just multiply it by that? Or is there more? Is it more in depth than that?
Well, there's actually a little bit of controversy about those numbers. I think they're actually done pretty well. The way they do it is they select roughly about 100 reefs of the 3,000, and then they literally tow a diver around each of those reefs, and every roughly 150 metres they do an estimate of coral cover. So they've been trained to just look at the coral and say, oh, it's 30% coral, 10% sand, 20% crustose coralline algae, and there's various other bits and pieces. And so they do the equivalent of towing a diver about 1,000 kilometres. So it's a huge effort that they go to. And that's how they come up with these estimates. And they've been doing pretty much the same thing, maybe not in the first few years. The first few years, I think they were sort of settling into the routine, but certainly the last 20 or 30 years, it's been pretty steady work.
So it's physically sighted. You have somebody physically trained who's basically an expert on it and sighted the coral.
Yeah, and they're in the water, whereas the bleaching surveys they do from air, and that, by the way, Jennifer Marahasi makes the point that is just junk, that you cannot see into the water properly to do a genuine survey. So, for example, in 2022, there was 2 reefs, Moore Reef and Stanley Reef, which we just went out to see just recently. Now, they were classified as severely and extremely severely bleached. And yet when we went out to them, they were fine. These reefs were in just wonderful condition, and yet these had supposedly gone through one of the worst bleaching events since, forever. But that's because they fly over at 200 miles an hour and 300 feet. You just can't actually see into the water. Whereas these surveys of coral cover are done with a diver towed behind a boat.
Wow.
So the narrative is that the reef is fragile, but what would it take to wipe it out? Like how fragile is it, or is it like most things quite resistant? It's not fragile. It's not a fragile system. Now, could we lose a whole lot of coral? Yeah, if we get a big cyclone like Cyclone Hamish or Cyclone Yasi, we could lose a third of that coral just overnight, right? But it will grow back like it always has done. If you can actually tell that these reefs that our reef is a long way from, they often talk about a tipping point, because you need to look at all the other reefs around the world. Now, remember our reef, the biggest reef system, the population adjacent to it's about 1 million people, in North Queensland. In Indonesia, you got 200 million people with their reefs. In Thailand, I don't know what the population is, but you got massive, massive people pressure. You don't have the restrictions on the way that fertiliser is applied and all these sorts of things. The reefs are often close to the coast, whereas the Great Barrier Reef is a long way from the coast. And yet, even in those places where the reefs are hammered, much worse than we'd ever like to see our Great Barrier Reef hammered, even there, the corals are
they're hanging on, and we're way, way better than that. So our Great Barrier Reef is nowhere near a tipping point. It's not fragile. An individual coral is fragile. If we keep on doing what we've been doing, well, and I'm sure we will, because we'll never take the Great Barrier Reef for granted. The Great Barrier Reef will be there until the sea level falls again in 5 to 10,000 years' time, and then it will be gone until the next sea level rise.
Now,
You've devoted your life to this, or at least your career. I can imagine that you would want to protect the reef more than anyone. What led you to actually go down this path?
The path of studying the reef, or to challenge the...
No, that was way back in the beginning.
Well, really an accident of fate. So most people think marine scientists are all biologists, and it's true that most of them are, but that you have to have these marine physicists like myself who look at water current flow, and because it's the environment that the corals grow in that's important, and that's determined by the physics, the way that the water heats up, how it moves around. And you need the marine chemists and the marine geologists. So I was a marine physicist. And because I came from a different background, this is one of the reasons why I think I look at the reef a little bit differently, that I'm not emotionally attached to it the way a lot of biologists are. So most of the biologists ended up doing marine science because of love, a genuine love, emotional attachment to what they're studying, whereas I came into it almost by accident, which doesn't mean to say that I don't value the reef very highly, but I think I'm a little more detached because of my physics background. So that's how I've come into it, and that's one of the reasons why I've been pushing this quality assurance. I can see that, look, some of this stuff is just junk science. We've got to do better than this. We're damaging the reputation of science itself by getting this wrong so often, and that graph demonstrates it so well, and we've got to do something about it. So that's more of a more recent thing that started, I'd say, probably in the last 15 years, and reached a crescendo when I was fired from the university.
So I've watched a few of your other interviews, and you've raised a few good points, and I think our viewers are a little bit maybe newer and maybe not as into politics. We're just starting to get into politics and starting to get into the awareness and topics. But peer review. So I've seen you mention peer review, and so I've been guilty of it too, because I'm the one who will turn around and go, I've just read a report, it's peer reviewed, it's amazing, This is great. And we're led to believe that peer reviewing is the ants pants, the standard, the gold standard. If you've peer reviewed, it's been peer reviewed 7 times, that's a sweet paper. Tell us your thoughts on peer reviewing.
Peer review is one of the biggest cons in science, and you actually hear a lot of eminent scientists say things just like you said, that it's the gold standard. And the average person, the public think that peer review is when some piece of work has been reviewed by maybe a dozen other scientists, like a great big jury, and they've pored over the experiments and done months and months of work and come to the conclusion that, yes, it's right. In reality, peer review is when, say, I write a paper, and I've done lots of peer reviews and had all my work peer reviewed. It goes off to a couple of other scientists who might read it for a couple of hours, maybe a day at most, at the very, very most, and they'll say, oh, yeah, it's right, or fix up some things. That's it. Now, that's not a quality assurance process. Quality assurance is when you actually really go over it. So in industry, if an industry is going to use some bit of science, they will redo the experiment because they could lose a whole lot of money on that if they're basing it on something that's wrong. So peer review is now well known to be junk. So even in the academies of science, it's now pretty well recognised that very, very roughly 50% of the peer-reviewed scientific work is wrong. So next time you hear on the radio, university study finds eating too many apples, stops cancer, those sorts of things which you hear more or less every day, those studies, 50% chance they're wrong.
Wow. And
Dr. Reed,
go Rebecca.
I just wanted to know what motivated you, inspired you to speak out and to be such a force that's going against this climate change narrative. I mean, us being One Nation candidates, we know what it's like sort of for a short-term thing to be controversial or representing a controversial party that questions things. But what was it that inspired you to start this journey?
Well, it started with the work that I and my colleagues had done on the sediment, the effect of farm sediment on the reef. And we were demonstrating unequivocally it wasn't having any effect. And we were just being completely ignored. We were the guys with all the data. We'd invented the instruments for measuring this, and we were being ignored. And I was wondering, how is this happening? And then I started to look at various other aspects of different science on the reef and could see that that had huge problems with it as well. And you just get angry that this is not the truth, that your job is the truth, at least to try to tell the truth. And I suspect that's true of many of your candidates too, that it's very difficult to find the truth, but you get angry and upset when things are clearly not true, and that just forced me to go ahead. Can I also say that when you get to my age, sort of approaching retirement, when I was fired, it's not the end of the world to have a big fight and get yourself fired. Now, when I was 40 and the kids were at school, that would have been a bit more of a serious thing, and maybe I wouldn't have spoken out. So one of the things I've been doing recently is to try to really encourage people who are in their late 50s and early 60s, scientists, professionals, right, across society. Time now to speak up, guys. Get yourself into a bit of trouble, and if you get fired, well, you retire a bit earlier. This is not the end of the world. And you actually have a duty, because the younger people can't do that because losing their job is much more serious for them. So that's really it. It's just you get angry when you see stuff that is just untrue, and people who shouldn't be blamed are being blamed.
That's the best way to go out, with a big bang, right? They just try and...
Yeah.
But you just mentioned young people. If we do have some young people, like I'm talking, school kids watching this, what message do you want to give to them? Because a lot of them are quite panicked at the moment about the state of the climate and the state of the reef. So what's your message for them?
My message is it's going to be okay, all right? It really is going to be okay. The Great Barrier Reef is brilliant, and it's going to remain brilliant. Don't worry about that. Worry about something else. But actually, the young people is where I really want to, because of that, I know that there's a lot of literally in depression about it. If you know any young people who want to head some of videos that I'm going to do, we're looking for young people to get involved with this. And to try to spread the word to other young people that the future actually is really bright for the Great Barrier Reef. Now, there are plenty of things in the world we need to worry about, no doubt about that. But the reef and even the climate change thing is not one of them. And that's the big message which I want to spread in the next, in my declining years.
Well, we're all trying to spread the same thing too. I've read report after report. I've read parliamentary reports. I've read all this kind of stuff, and there's just no, to quote Malcolm Roberts, there's no empirical data saying that humans are causing climate change in the first place. We know that climate changes naturally anyway. We have a hot heating and cooling period. So, we're also trying to get the young people to, be aware of actually this is the way it is. This is life. This is why it's valuable, but it all goes through its cycles and it's all resilient. It makes me feel good too that you say that the Great Barrier Reef is going to be good and it's fine. And as long as we just continue to look after it, then it shouldn't be a problem. I have one quick question regarding the crown of thorns starfish. That's part of the ecosystem, as you said. By humans intervening and starting to really kill these creatures, I know you said we can't really make that big of an impact, but would there not be if it's an ecosystem, aren't there other animals or bigger fish or something that eat those or use them to survive as part of the ecosystem? Do they not clean the coral maybe or something like that as well?
Well, there will be some effect for sure. I mean, you can't just, go in there and take some part out of the ecosystem without having some other effect. But really, they're having such a pathetic impact on the crown and thorn starfish that you just don't worry about it, except for the fact that it's just wasting money. I mean, if you gave a whole bunch of farmers, $20 million to work on, I don't know, some other weed prevention, they could do something quite useful with that. That would actually be good for the environment and good for all sorts of things. So that's the main thing. But I do take your point. It just is a silly thing to do, to mess around with a native species like that. But if I can also come back to your previous point about, how good the reef is and young people, we've been given, almost a God-given opportunity in this last year by record high coral cover. This doesn't, record highs don't happen every year. And so we've got to make sure we publicise this point while it is at record high, because it is going to fall in the next year or so. So if you ever get a chance, just keep on saying record high coral cover. That's the main thing, and that they must have been telling lies when they said about all these bleaching events.
We should make up some T-shirts and stuff. Get some stickers like, bumper stickers that you can put on your car. And just
that's right.
Stick them on everywhere. Just send people out just to stick them on the backs of people's cars.
Well, that's what this is. You see, it's the Reef Rebels that we're running. That and we need to be Reef Rebels. That we don't believe the narrative that the reef is being destroyed. We do believe that we want to make sure we look after it, obviously. But record high coral cover. These people have been lying to us, or at least misleading us in some way.
Well, as you said, the coral's going to start going down, so that the narrative will be that the Earth's about to end when that happens. But can you just explain what the Reef Rebels are?
I will in a second, but you're right. I mean, next year, 2023, the results will come out, and we might have had a cyclone, and we've lost 10% of the coral. And, oh, my goodness, the Great Barrier Reef loses another 10% of the coral cover.
Yep.
You can just imagine the headlines, which will be much bigger than the headlines of the record horror. And the students thinking, well, we lost 50% between 1960 and 1985, and then another 50% between 1985, and then another 50%. And now we lost 93%, and now we lost another 10%. We should be so much negative coral by now. But, you can understand why people get depressed by that. So what Reef Rebels is it's our plan to get young people involved. So just recently we took a bunch of sort of early 20s uni students out to the reef, because I figured if I can just show them the reef and show them a little bit of data, they're not going to believe that the reef is, or they're almost certainly not going to believe the reef is damaged. So that's what we did, and we've taken some video of that. And we're trying to get this this program up and running where we can appeal to young people, and also hopefully use young people to communicate the message with other young people that there is hope, that it's not just hope, it's, fabulous hope that we have for the Great Barrier Reef as one of the most pristine, unspoilt ecosystems on Earth that certainly goes through cycles of destruction and regrowth, but overall it's just wonderful.
Dr. Reid, I've got another question. Why is it so important for the narrative to be the reef is dying? If we should be celebrating, I believe government should be inspiring people to live a happy life. And reassure them that everything's going to be okay, and we're working towards making it better. But all this bad news, and then why is it so important that the narrative has to be that the coral's dying when it's not?
Well, because the narrative that the coral is dying, or that the world is warming, allows a lot of governments with authoritarian tendencies to take power. So essentially what's happened in Queensland is the state government has taken a huge amount of control of the way farmers work. So they can, the reef police is what they call, they can go out onto the farm and effectively tell the farmers what to do. So they have tremendous power. Now, there's a lot of politicians who aren't in that category, that they probably do believe that there's a degree of exaggeration. But if you're a politician, say in, I don't know, Warringah or somewhere like that, you would be, even if you did believe that the reef wasn't damaged, can you imagine what would happen if you said publicly, oh, I don't think the reef is damaged, we've got record coral cover. I think all these science institutions must be a bit untrustworthy. How long are you going to last in the Labor Party or the Liberal Party if you say something like that? Especially as those same institutions are beating the government over the head and saying, you've got to do something about the reef is dying. And if you don't do something about the reef, we're going to jump up even harder and tell the whole world how your government isn't doing the right thing. So those politicians are being blackmailed by the scientific institutions who they fund. So that's the crazy thing about it. So even the good politicians have got their hands tied to some extent. And so in the end, our problem is these institutions. They are like a mafia. They tell politicians what to do. You get your kneecap. You get kneecapped if you don't do the right thing. You can get yourself fired from institutions very easily if you don't say the right things. We've got a real problem.
So the battleground is the institutions, and I've heard you say in the past that they can't be trusted. Is it possible to recapture them, or is it at the point now where we're just going to have to start creating our own institutions?
We need to start our own institutions. We need red teams where we challenge them. So we need the Department of Agriculture, the Minister of Agriculture, to say, okay, we've got all these regulations that say that farmers are killing the reef from pesticides. I want a red team. I've got a $10 million here. I'm going to do real peer review where we do get a dozen scientists and they're going to go over this and they're going to write a report, and that institution is going to have to respond to this. And if they don't respond to it properly, I'm going to think about repealing that legislation. But you've got to be able to supply the red team. Essentially, I'm just a one-man red team. There's a few of our other scientists, but, we're a small band. None of us are funded by government. But that's what's needed to challenge these. And once they're challenged, the groupthink can't take hold as much as it has. They know that they're not going to get away with the lies that they have done for so many years, and they will start becoming reliable again. Donald Trump would say, you got to drain the swamp. It's exactly the same problem that we have in the institutions as we have in many parts of bureaucracy.
So you've also stated that the university education faculties are incredibly damaging with their research that actually isn't research. That's a quote from you. I saw that today. So that's why I had to read it, because I wanted to try and get it word for word. My question to you on that is, has the research become more of a religion of belief than hard, replicable science study?
Definitely. So I have been involved in the education debate. That was sort of not to the same extent I've been on this reef, but I ran a group called Plato Queensland, which is a small group of teachers, and we actually got external exams reinstated in Queensland. We went for 40 years without external exams in senior high school. We managed to get those brought back. And it struck me, looking at the way the education faculties at universities, which are just a disaster, I would close those down totally, right? Because they damage the teacher training. They have a huge effect on what is taught in schools. They do more damage to our society than any other group. They need to be shut down. Yes, they believe that education is about essentially brainwashing the students to be good little environmentalists, good social justice warriors, to bring down the Western civilization, all these sorts of things. You can trace it pretty well back to education faculties. They are really bad institutions.
Wow. Well, it just stuns me when people say these things. We trust our universities, we trust our schools, and we trust our education faculties we send our children to get them educated so that they can be like yourself, physicists, and work on, like, we dream of our kids always wanting to be better than us. I'm a sign writer by trade. the most thing I've ever done in the ocean is basically, throw a line in, go fishing, and I did snorkel the Great Barrier Reef, which is pretty awesome. But, hearing that, these systems are just indoctrinating our children, it just blows my mind.
Well, can I give you an example? A couple of years before I was fired from JCU, I was looking through the Department of Education at James Cook University, what they were teaching people, and the central strand running through all their courses on education, teaching teachers, was sustainability, that everything had to come back to this environmental sustainability. And things like gender equity, multiculturalism, LGBTQI, etc., all this type of stuff, Indigenous. So it wasn't about making sure the kids could, or the teachers knew how to control classes, could teach maths, or even that these prospective teachers even knew a bit of maths themselves. That wasn't the central theme. It was all these other social justice. And remember, what we're doing is we give our children to these people for 12 years, right? We give them 12 years to be indoctrinated. And then if they go to university, another 3 years. Is it any wonder our poor young people are in the state that they are, in this state of depression, that the world is coming to the end, that everything about our civilization is a disgrace, that our history is a disaster and an embarrassment? We've given our children to these people for 12 years.
Well, I can assure you, Dr. Reid, that One Nation is trying to stand against this. I can tell you that. I know that for a fact. We've spoken to Mark Latham, and he chairs the education committee for New South Wales. And, when we speak to him, he's just onto it. Like, he is just onto that. And we're just going to, 100%, Rebecca, and we're trying to find, and I'm the same. I've got 3 daughters who we debate frequently in our house about climate change. And I said, and then when my daughter comes home and goes, we're not allowed to do this and we're not allowed to do that, and I'm like, sweet. And then I'll run to my office and I can get my all my information that I've got here, and I'll read through and I say, tell your teacher this, and this. And so they don't, so my kids are a little bit, probably more argumentative than others, but that's our mission. That's what we're meant. That's what we're here to do. We've got to provide the other side of the story. It's, amazing to have somebody like you, a physicist, who's so experienced and, with the ocean as well. Like, it's just really good to have you on our side, I guess, on the side of common sense. We see it's there. It's there. It's there.
And I think it's an absolute winner politically, if only you can get the message out, if only the mainstream media would publish what's actually going on in our schools. Because, look, the average person thinks that a lot of what's going on in the schools is just a disgrace. And you're seeing, a real pushback in America, in Florida, is it West Virginia? You're also seeing in England now where they're pushing back against some of the most crazy things. And, and it's right across society. It's in the what was, traditionally the working class people. They're very often very, socially conservative. They don't want this stuff jammed down our children, that we're basically a racist society and all these other things, and that we're destroying the planet. So I would have thought it's an absolute winner for a political party to fight the culture war, because there is a war. The other side says, oh, you shouldn't fight the culture wars. Well, they would say that because they just about won it.
They want it,
but we do need to fight it.
Yeah. Well, we thought we'd win as well, but it's not. We've got a lot more work to do, apparently. So with people like yourself, with people like us going at it, and and what I like about it is that you can give us replicated data. So you can replicate the data that you provide. I'd imagine you're such a stickler for it that I'm sure you can replicate everything.
Yep. Well, the stuff that we did on the effect of sediments on the Great Barrier Reef, I mean, that's been replicated by us, dozens and dozens of times, and by other scientists. Even some of my scientific opposition have effectively replicated the fact that the biggest thing that determines sediment on the reef is not the farms; it's actually natural resuspension. This is, hugely replicated. And even, that graph that we've shown, that's replicated on 100 different reefs. It's done with a good quality assurance. We got record high coral cover, guys. Go out and tell the world. That means
we should get the Wiggles onto it. We should get everyone onto it. They won't do it because they're too left.
Yeah, but you're right. The Wiggles should be going, hey, wiggle, wiggle. We've got the Great Barrier Reef has never had more coral. Let's celebrate.
The Wiggles are woke now.
That's what they should be doing.
Yeah, and by the way, you're at it. And so, but that actually means our institutions must have been misleading us. So we need to do something about that.
Wow.
Another thing we've been a little bit misled on is nuclear energy. I've heard you speak about that in the past. What's your view on nuclear?
It's going to happen sooner or later. You're seeing right around the world the views change. Even the Japanese, after Fukushima, after they did a controlled experiment with 4 replicates and they blew up 4 of their reactors, and it was a bit messy, but it didn't kill anybody except one person. Even the Japanese are going to probably reopen some of their nuclear power stations. The British are almost certainly going to go down small modular nukes. It's going to happen. It's just going to happen. And let's hope Australia eventually gets off this crazy situation where we're quite happy to sell our nuclear power to, just about anybody, but we're not prepared to use it ourselves. It's a silly thing to do, that we export uranium, but we won't use it ourselves.
Do you think we're going to suffer, though, before we get to that point with the blackouts and the wind turbines and the failures that we're seeing across the world? We always seem to see it happening before it happens here, but we still go and follow blindly and experience it the hard way. So do you think we'll still go down that path before we start hitting nuclear?
Yep. Look, in many ways, Vladimir Putin has done us a big favour by cutting off the gas, because what has happened in Europe has just, Putin has essentially sped up the process which was inevitably going to occur, of just rapidly rising energy prices, and any little shock, like a bit of a war in Ukraine. Let's face it, it's just a bit of a war. It's not a big war by, World War II standards. You only needed one little shock and that energy system was going to almost collapse, which it is essentially in Europe, very close to it, with massive prices. You can imagine what it's like in the north of England in some old house without central heating, and that's what they're facing this winter. Wow. So they're facing reality, and they're going to start fracking. I guarantee you, England's going to start fracking, and nukes are going to come back. It's all going to be too late for this crisis. But when you've got a few, frozen stiff grandmas up in the north of England, attitudes are going to change pretty quickly. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, it's going to take longer here because we don't have that emergency just yet, but we will get there sooner or later.
Our emergency would probably be based more on heat, I'd imagine, so much than cold. So I think we'll see it when if we start getting brownouts and stuff like that, because everyone's running their ACs all the time.
Yeah, I think that's right. But the problem is that a lot of damage gets done before you get to that stage. So at the moment, we're running at very high energy prices. What you end up doing is you damage business. Say farmers, for instance, one of the huge costs for farmers is electricity for irrigation in lots of areas like Bundaberg, in Ayr, lots of places. And if the price of electricity goes through the roof, they become less and less economical and they go out of business. The power never goes off, so nobody in the city sees it, except that, food prices have now just gone up and we don't export as much food. So that's what happens before you get these dramatic blackouts and brownouts.
We had Pamela Jones on one of our... we've interviewed Pamela Jones recently, and just as far as nuclear waste goes, that nuclear is so efficient that you could have that every person in their whole life would only produce 1 can of Coke as waste of nuclear energy.
The nuclear waste problem really isn't a problem. Where do you think all the nuclear waste that's been generated with over 50 or 60 years of running nuclear power, where is all that waste now? There's such small quantities of it that it's all stored on site, right? They've just got a big shed, big concrete shed with very thick walls, and they just put it in there. It's such small amounts that that's where they put it. Now, eventually, we're going to need a little bit more space. Old mines, the centre of Australia, old uranium mines, which were once full of uranium. Well, you can put it back there. Yeah. There's no problem with nuclear waste disposal. There is a concern with nuclear proliferation, but frankly, we've got that. The disease is out. The Pakistanis have got it. Won't be long with the crazy policies we're running at the moment. The Iranians will have nuclear weapons. So we're just going to have to live with that one way or the other. And Australia having nuclear power, or even Indonesia having nuclear power, which they do, it's not going to make any difference to that problem. That cat is already out of the bag.
Yeah, so why suffer? Why continue the black ban on nuclear power when we can have a good, reliable, and even for the green folk out there, look, One Nation, none of us here want to destroy the planet ever. I've always want a small footprint as much as I can. But nuclear is the way of the future with a strong, solid baseload energy. We can make it cheap and affordable. We can create wealth in Australia. We've got a massive supply of uranium here, even in New South Wales as well. We've got our own supply of it. I don't see I think we really do need to also spread the word about that, because it only has major positives and very little negative.
It does. And by the way, one of the problems with nuclear power is that most people have no idea how natural large quantities of radiation are. That right at the moment, you're all receiving a whole lot of radiation coming up through the floor from the ground. Your backyard would have, I don't know, it depends on how deep down you dig, but large amounts of uranium in just normal soil, right? And it's emitting radiation. We're getting radiation coming down from cosmic rays from outer space. It's hitting us all the time. It's not like that we live in a world without radiation. There's lots of radiation. And the extra that you get, even from a Fukushima type thing, unless you're right in the middle, the extra radiation is very trivial, and it's certainly not a problem.
And from what we've been told by previous guests, low dose radiation is proving to be beneficial for humans as well.
I'm not sure whether that's necessarily true, but there's certainly been some experiments which indicate that could be true. Okay. But what is beyond any doubt is that low doses of radiation are no problem at all. And I don't know how much detail you want to go into that, but there's this principle in the ridiculous safety regulation called nonlinear no threshold hypothesis, which essentially means that if you get very small doses, then it can still cause a problem. Now, if we use this, say, with taking Panadol, right, we know that if you take, 100 Panadols, it will kill you, right? Mm. Well, if you take one Panadol, that means that 1% of the people would die just from taking one Panadol, because it's 1% of 100, which would kill you. We use the same thing with radiation. Now, of course, 1% of the people do not die if you take one Panadol. Otherwise, there'd be a lot of dead people around from Panadol. Yeah. So we use this ridiculous, crazy linear no threshold hypothesis to regulate radiation, and it gives you just crazy results. And we've got to do something about that. So it's another example, unfortunately, of the scientific institutions being untrustworthy. A great shame.
Wow. I mean, at the cost of the people. It just seems to be at the cost of the people. Everything's always at the cost of the people.
Yep, that's right. So, and we're supposed to, put the scientific institutions almost on a pedestal. They speak, we believe, right? And unfortunately, it's not true. It's just not true. Now, that doesn't mean to say that everything they say is wrong. No. I'm in a situation with anything where there's a degree of ideology involved, and unfortunately, nuclear power is one of those. I don't know what to believe when I hear it, because they're untrustworthy. That doesn't mean to say everything they say is wrong, but if somebody keeps lying to you and then they say something else, you think, well, maybe it's true, but how am I supposed to tell? So our civilization depends on these institutions like the Royal Society, which for hundreds of years have been incredibly trustworthy, but are now utterly untrustworthy. We're in a very dark place because of that.
So we're almost about to wrap up now, but what's the future hold for Dr. Peter Ridd? Where do you want your work to go next?
Well, we just keep on pushing that the reef is fabulous, that our fundamental problem is a quality assurance problem. Our institutions are not doing proper quality assurance. I just keep banging away at that, and we are way ahead of where we were, say, when I was fired in 2018, raising the profile, at least on the Great Barrier Reef. But you're seeing other similar sorts of people doing exactly the same thing on other issues, whether it's Susan Crockford on polar bears, which are in very good numbers. You're seeing major, I think, advances in bringing down the walls and demonstrating to people that we've got to reform our scientific institutions and make them reliable again. So that's what I'm going to be working on. And also Reef Rebels. This is part of the aim of doing that.
Yeah. Well, I think you really are a hero. And just to go back to when 100%. You were fired, how do you look back on that now? Do you look back on that as a positive? Like, did you look back and think that kind of had to happen to get to this point now?
It was inevitable. I was saying to the guys who worked for me that sooner or later I was going to get chucked out, and they kept on saying, "No, you've said that a lot of times. You've never been chucked out." I was right in the end. It was inevitable, and although it's cost me personally quite a lot, especially cash, even though we got wonderful donations. We got $1.5 million of donations by 10,000 donors for the High Court Challenge, but we had to throw in another 300 grand, so it still cost us a bit. But it was absolutely well worthwhile doing that. In a way, I was given time away from the teaching and the sort of the day-to-day work as an academic, that I could really start pushing this properly. Being fired makes you sort of gets a bit of a fire in your belly. So I'm out, I'm free, I'm a bit angry, and we're actually kicking quite a few good solid runs at the moment on this whole science quality assurance. And then the Reef decided to cooperate and give us record high coral cover.
Record high.
we got a year of fun, I can tell you.
No, that's the best.
Just quickly back to the High Court. Like you've gone all the way to the High Court. That's as far as you could go, really.
Yeah.
Was that stressful? Like, what was that journey like?
Yeah, it was very stressful, especially when we ended up losing on this ridiculous technicality. We were fighting on the grounds of academic freedom of speech, that I was, talking about my area, and I should be able to talk about things about the university as a whole. The High Court in the end ruled that the university had illegally censured me, that they were not allowed to do what they did in terms of telling me you can't talk about quality assurance in science and all the other things, that they acted illegally. But incredibly, that the work contract meant that they were allowed to stop me talking about their illegal activity. I read this and I thought, I don't know quite how you get this, but anyway, that's the law apparently. So we lost on the technicality, but we did get an important precedent put into essentially the statutes that universities can't do what they did to me. And of course, with the extra legislation that Pauline Hanson was really pushed through, actually, academics are in a somewhat better position. The big problem in academia now is that they're full of people on the left or the extreme left, and it's still hard for Peter Ridds and the like to come out. But at least if they do, they're much less likely to be fired now than they were in 2017 when I ran into first trouble.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, you had to be the one that, copped it. But, that's one, it's still a victory in the end, I think, you did, being able to bring light onto the issue. And that's a shame that have they ever approached you to ever go back, or would you ever go back if they asked you, or I don't know, like what do you do? But we all got to keep making money, right?
Look, if JCU said to me, you can come back as an adjunct, I'd say, yeah, fine. Because I don't blame. We've got a new Vice-Chancellor. The old Vice-Chancellor got left. We've got a new Vice-Chancellor at that university. It's my university as far as I'm concerned. I went there as an undergraduate. All my children went there. My father even did a PhD in his old age there. My brother, my sister, my wife all went to that university. It's the sort of North Queensland University. But they never will, because it will be them admitting that they're at fault, that even though there's a new Vice-Chancellor, there's still the old council that backed the old Vice-Chancellor, and they don't want to admit that they acted abominably and that the High Court actually really gave them a thorough ticking off that they acted unlawfully, despite the fact that they ultimately ended up getting this sort of technical win.
Yeah. That's the problem with the court system. The victory is not as good as never as good. It doesn't outweigh the fight. Like, you can't walk away just going, yes, I won that one. It's not like a football game or something. It's like you'll fight for 5 years and then you walk away as a winner, and you're just kind of like, oh, I'm glad that's over. I've just got to keep going. That's just, I hate court. I hate the courts.
Yeah. I certainly don't want to be involved in anything like that, or even remotely like it. It's just too horrible. The whole system is, it's necessary, but it's horrible.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Reid, how can people follow you?
I've got a Facebook page, the Dr. Peter Reid Facebook page, which has a lot of people. And I'm also working on a website called Plato GBR. That's Plato as in the Greek philosopher, gbr.com. Where I put a lot of this stuff up on the reef, and there's a lot there now, and there'll be more going up in the next week or so, which has got a lot of scientific information on the reef, including these latest record high coral cover statistics.
Excellent.
And what about the Reef Rebels?
I'm going to... Oh, sorry. Yep. I'm going in home. When I go into the house and I speak to my kids, I'm going to go, guess what? There's record cover of coral in the Great Barrier Reef. Yes. Everything's all good in the world. That's right. Sorry about Reef Rebels.
Yeah. Well, Reef Rebels, we've got a couple of accounts on Reef Rebels. That's small at the moment, but we're hoping to grow that, and that will be our vehicle to try to get record high coral cover to as many young people around the world as we can. So I'm doing a lot of things just like this for people in America and in England. We are getting the message out, and I thank you for interviewing us, because it all helps. Every little bit helps.
Well, the most important question of the night is: are we too old for the Reef Rebels?
Well, young at heart, and there's a sad thing that's happened today, that it's only the old that can be genuinely rebellious. And we need to lead the revolution. And once the young people realise that they have been brainwashed and duped by untrustworthy mafia-like institutions, they will come along. They may have been brainwashed, but I've known enough, university students to know they haven't lost their brain totally.
So is that a polite way of saying yes, we're too old?
Well, we're too old, but you're not too old, obviously.
Well, I'm going to sign up. I'm going to look this Reef Rebels up, because I've got to tell you something. That logo that you guys have come up with, that Reef Rebels with the manta ray on there, that's wicked work. I'm a sign writer by trade. I love that. I seen it in the background there, and I loved it. It's awesome.
Oh, I'm glad. I'll tell Leo, that my guy who's done that, I agree. It's got this slightly sinister look to it. And we are, because we are the like the partisans, like the French resistance, working undercover, white-handing away at these terrible institutions that have been brainwashing our children. So that's what we are, unfortunately.
Well, we are the resistance, so it's very important for everyone watching to share this interview. I think everyone needs to know about the record coral cover, record high coral cover, so we'll be preaching it wherever we can as well. But we really want to thank you, Dr. Reid, for coming on tonight. This was a great interview, and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I really thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It was awesome.